Welcome to Candid Conversations, where we talk about the power of feedback. I'm Blake Kohler, one of the co-founders of Pulse for Good, and here are my co-hosts. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Mark Weaver, CFO at Pulse and co-author of Candid.
Yes,
Sounds
Remington
pretty cool. I had someone yesterday text me and said, author, add it to the list. And it took me like a couple hours to figure out what he was saying. And then I saw some of our LinkedIn posts. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm an author.
Yeah, I've got a couple of those. I'm Remington Rainey, also co-author and co-founder.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, we wrote a book on gathering feedback because we want people to be better at gathering feedback. I think, maybe this is best illustrated with a story. So if you guys don't mind, I'll jump in and storytell for a second. And we covered this a little bit in one of the previous podcasts, but there's a lady named Florence Chadwick, right, who years ago wanted to sail would have been easy, swim the English Channel. So for context, there's a body of water in between England and France called the English Channel. It's fairly long, but short enough that there's a tunnel that goes underneath it, right? But it's still a large body of water. And no woman had ever swam across this. And so she decided that one of her goals was to swim across this. And so one morning she started out, and when they do it, they have a boat that goes along with them to help them. So if they tire out, they can reach up and tap out and get out. And so she was almost across the channel, but this thick fog had rolled in. And so she couldn't see what direction she was going. And at some point she tapped out, got out of the boat. Well, it turns out she was just barely off of the shore, right? Like she had just missed this goal by, I don't know.
It was like a half mile, I think.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, and when you're sailing, man, swimming.
Yeah, half mile is actually
which is way worse than sailing.
Yeah, but
out of 26, she did like 25 and a half.
Yeah, right. So she's basically swimming a marathon, and she bails at the very last point, which is kind of crazy. And people asked her, why did you quit? And her response was, it wasn't the swim, I was licked by the fog, right? It was the fact that she couldn't tell what direction land was in. So she didn't know if she was swimming in the right direction or not, which I think really well encompasses the problem with not gathering feedback. Is a lot of times we can be moving in directions, but very questioning, is this the right thing to be doing? Are we moving in the right direction? Which makes us move more tentatively and sometimes stop part of the way through the process.
Yeah. And just something came up in my head is her body was probably at 25-ish, 26 miles is feeling probably a lot of the pain and rigor that our clients, the people that are providing human services in these organizations that we work with, they're beat up, they're tired, they're doing 10 different things. And so to ask them to do anything extra if they're not sure if it's worth it is like that comparison between her, like, well, geez, if I'm heading the wrong direction, I could have to swim another 10 miles or 20 or be going back the wrong way. So mentally it's like, okay, let's just stop.
It reminds me, they've done these experiments where they'll leave people in a room that is completely white, right? Completely white, and we'll ask them to walk in a straight line. And in a big enough room, eventually everyone starts walking in circles. Like, we just are really bad without a point of reference at being able to understand where to go to keep things straight. And so you can imagine how hard that would be swimming. She must have thought about that she could literally be swimming in giant circles without the point of reference to go to.
Yeah.
That for sure would be
fog and everything doesn't help.
No.
I for sure would be yep, we're done.
Yeah.
Well, right. It's the same as like a hike. I know you guys have been on hikes, but if you can see the peak, then it's so much easier to get there. But how many times do you think it's the peak and you get there and it's a false peak, and then you go down again and see another peak and you get there and it's another false peak?
Yeah, every time.
That was elk hunting, remember?
Yes.
We thought we were only 2 valleys away from the car, and we, like 7 valleys later, we're like, let's just start a fire and sleep here.
We about quit until
I think I saw like the shine of the
reflector,
the moon.
Yeah, reflecting on your car.
Yeah.
The crazy thing about it, I just listening the other day, heard a statistic that most people get lost within 20 feet of a trail when they're hiking, right? And when eventually search and rescue has to come find them, most of the time where they got lost was within, very close confines to what the trail is. It's just they happen to have taken their eyes off of that. And then even more damningly, they start moving in a direction without that feedback of where they should be going, right? And so when you have that peak, at least, bushwhack plenty of times where it's like, I know where I'm going to, I'm just going to cut up to there. It may not be the easiest path, but you get there. What works out a lot worse, though, is when you literally don't have any sense of direction. You're covered in that fog, you're unsure of what to do, and then you start moving directions. You're just as likely to move in the wrong direction as you are to move in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, which in that trail scenario, right, the advice is stay where you are, stay put.
Yep.
Number one, if anyone knew where you were hiking, they at least say, hey, let's just follow this trail and see if we can find them. Worse, if you go 10 miles away from that, then that's your search radius just
expands.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why, they say stay where you are. It is interesting, though. Imagine if you add some form of urgency to it, right? Someone's hurt, someone's bleeding, the sun's going down, whatever it is, it's incredibly hard for a person to be like, I'm just going to stay where I'm at because there's urgency.
Yeah.
I think bringing this analogy all the way back around, our customers and the people that we work with to try and gather feedback, they have an immense sense of urgency to try and help people because they realize that these people's lives are sometimes in tatters or whatever and need to get out of that situation. And so staying still is not something that is acceptable. But what that means is without a point to go to, they're just as likely to move in the wrong direction as they are to move in the right direction.
Yeah. Or they stop moving, or they give up, or they quit, or they go find a different job, or they give up on the people that they're actually trying to serve because that feedback loop never actually gets
not
back
there
to
for them. Yeah. It reminds me of our processes specifically to feedback of people looking for that silver bullet of a survey question to gather feedback. And I think a lot of times what happens, what I've noticed with some of our clients is they start asking, when they're asking questions, hey, we might want to change some of the questions we're asking, or they question the validity of asking core questions over and over and over, the same set of questions, experiential questions. And what I think is oftentimes happening there is they're people that aren't looking at the data on the back end. They are just waiting for some magical comment to come in from the survey questions without looking at the benchmarks so they're feeling lost because they're not having that feedback loop on their side.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is that feeling of lostness because you're not used to using those muscles of getting feedback and doing something with it. I met with someone this morning where they have a literally 10-page survey of questions that they're wanting people to do, right, and go through things. And they expressed that they've spent weeks coming up with this survey and going through everything. And I just had a quick conversation with them of how much have you talked about what you're going to do with this data? And kind of sheepishly, she's like, I haven't talked really at all about it. And to me, that is the difference between having that target of where you're going, right?
Yeah.
And just that compelling need to act. We know we need to listen, and so let's ask everything. We spend all this time to try and make sure we're listening well, which is good. The problem is true listening is a response, right? If I just sit and listen to everything you say and never respond to you in any way, you don't actually think I'm listening. You think I'm zoned out, right? There's a distinct difference there. But when we actually respond, when we do something with it and we build that muscle, all of a sudden we start getting places because we set doing something as the goal, the target, the end thing, doing something based off that feedback. And that becomes the peak for us to go to on our next hike, so to speak, as opposed to if you're just walking for no particular reason because it's good to walk. There's a distinction in those two different things that I think one gets you beyond that burnout point and one will eventually lead to burnout because you're not trying to get anywhere. Bringing it back around to Florence Chadwick, right? She had a very distinct point she was trying to get to. If she could have seen it, she would have gotten there, had no problems. She does it, I don't know how long later she does it, weeks, days later, whatever it is. Like it wasn't a capability problem. It was a mindset problem. And I think that is where a lot of people get lost in the feedback process, is just changing that mindset to what am I going to do with this, as opposed to how do I ask questions? How do I inconvenience myself the least is oftentimes what they're asking.
Well, the beginning of the book starts with a feedback problem. So I guess what is the feedback problem? And really, I guess what that's asking in my mind is, and I think we see it across organizations when we start talking to them, is, okay, what are you doing and why aren't you doing this more consistently or better?
Yeah, and I guess coming back to what we were talking about a second ago, when you think about feedback is a lot like exercise, right? Like every organization knows they should be doing it. And we think about needing that thing to go to, needing to be able to see the land, whatever it is. Every group knows you should be doing this, but the problem is that we don't. And there's a whole bunch of good excuses that we drum up with to be able to not get feedback, because it's just more convenient not to, for the most part.
The other thing that I see is, it's great talking about it from an exercise perspective, is it's people are guilty of it in the gym. And I think in processes, I know I am. I'm definitely if I'm going to do this, I want it to be as good as possible. But oftentimes it takes me months to get started, or actually to even begin that process, because I'm mapping out the process for months. And that's something I've learned about myself, is the almost the perfectionist side of things, of like, hey, there's good enough and that needs to be good enough, otherwise you'll never start. And in the gym, how many people go and just go ham for a couple days and then they're too sore to ever go back, and they're just like, I'm not doing this. And I think I see that in organizations. As we start with them, they get meticulous about the questions they're going to ask, but they never even get to that back end of the feedback loop of, well, what are we going to do once we start getting feedback?
So it's interesting. You pointed out two different things there using the gym analogy, because I think it's a great analogy, right? The first is that perfectionism, right? Of perfectionism sometimes is the reason we don't want to gather feedback for a few reasons, right? A, we want a perfect feedback process, which as soon as you inject the variable of the people you're getting feedback from, all of a sudden perfectionism is out the window. People are going to respond to things differently than you thought, and whatever. The other thing is feedback often exposes the flaws that we want to conveniently ignore, right? Because if I'm not thinking about it, it doesn't trigger my perfectionism. The other part, though, that you pointed out is that burst of energy people have when they're working out that first week. So one of my favorite times to go to a gym is that first week in January, right? Where all of a sudden every machine is taken. There's 80 people on the treadmills or whatever, and there's just a million people there.
Not to mention all of the new Christmas gym gear.
Yeah, all that type of stuff, right? And I'm as guilty as anybody, but I guess my favorite part is 2 or 3 weeks in, when all of a sudden there's the same people you were seeing in November that are there, and you get 1 or 2 people that have kind of hung on, but for the most part, everybody's gone, right? That burst of energy doesn't become sustainable. And so I think there's both the perfectionism and there's the sustainability that are reasons people struggle without getting feedback. But I think there's more. Just going back to that scenario of being lost in the woods, how many of us, you guys might be better at this, but it would be really low on my list of things to do to yell and try and get someone to help me.
Oh, yeah. One of my bags has a whistle built into the buckle. And I'm like, dude, if I have to use this,
then you're in real trouble.
Yeah. And mentally, am I ever going to use that? Like, no, I'll just hike out of wherever I am.
Yeah. And I think about that, right? Because that really is feedback. That's what you're seeking feedback. They're wanting to know where the trail is, right? Is by yelling or whistling or whatever it is. But I guess maybe pride, right? So there's that perfectionism, there's that sustainability, and then I think the pride of not wanting to maybe admit that I did something wrong or have a fault be pointed out. I think that's another big part of the feedback problem of why people don't gather feedback, is because they're worried about what it exposes themselves to.
Yeah, absolutely. This is maybe another tangent, but we bring it up all the time in presentations about the product and the platform, is we're asking you to gather feedback from vulnerable populations, but by nature, soon as you start doing that, or even open up the idea to that, your staff is going to, they themselves, be vulnerable and feel vulnerable. And they're the ones with a little bit more power in the situation. So they're going to push back on the idea of asking feedback, especially if there's a question about staff.
Oh, 100%. Right.
Yeah.
And you're right. That vulnerability that we feel, which is as the book will talk about, there's uppercase vulnerability and lowercase vulnerability. That's very much a lowercase vulnerability. They have the ability to opt out of that, but that vulnerability is uncomfortable, right? It just is. Exposing ourselves to it is there. I'm curious though, what besides those three things, besides the pride, right? Besides that, the sustainability of I just burn myself out trying to get feedback, and besides that perfectionism, why else do you think organizations don't gather feedback? Using exercise as an analogy maybe would be helpful here, but knowing that they almost all know they should be doing it, what other reasons have you heard that people are like, nah, we're good?
How much of it is just laziness? Sorry, like I don't care to be great at my job. I got other things that I want to do and think about, and this is just going to require more work and more effort. And
I've never considered this before, but in these industries, there's this term of learned helplessness, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you can get somebody that's
called what?
Learned helplessness.
Okay.
Basically, you learn to be helpless. That no matter what you do, it's not going to influence things.
It's a fear of a lot of people that, from a taxpayer perspective of homeless services solutions, of, hey, if we give them that, then they're just not going to learn how to pick themselves up by the bootstraps for.
Yeah, and interesting, in organizational psychology, there's this idea behind motivation, right? Motivation is this equation. There's actually a few different ways you can determine motivation.
You're going to need a whiteboard for this.
Yeah,
place.
anyways, but when you look at motivation, a lot of it comes from, do I believe I can do it, right? If I don't believe I can do it, I don't have a lot of motivation. Do I believe that my efforts and how much I can do it actually lead to something, right? So if I work hard at work, do I believe I can work hard at work? Sure, totally. Do I believe that if I work hard at work, my work will reward me, right? That's another part of motivation.
Yeah.
If you don't, you have no motivation. It doesn't matter how much you believe you could do the job if you don't believe that that's there. And then on top of that, there's kind of a third factor where it's, do I believe that those things are interconnected and that one will trigger the other and I'll eventually get the reward? So do I believe the organization I'm working with? Do I believe in myself? And I believe that those things are interconnected, right? And that the amount of work I put in is a lever that then triggers the benefit from the organization. So with learned helplessness, the idea is that motivation, the equation is broken.
Mm-hmm.
And that I either don't believe that my work is the lever that then triggers some sort of benefit, or I don't believe in the organization that they're going to follow through on whatever the benefit is, or I don't believe in myself. Most of the time, at least in my opinion, it's they don't believe in the organization or in the lever.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talk about this a lot in context of people experiencing a vulnerability, like being homeless or in a mental behavioral health facility or whatever. I think the same thing's true, though, as staff. I think sometimes they've put in great effort and they thought it would influence something, but the organization didn't move in the direction they thought it should or wanted to, or for a host of reasons. Some may be good reasons. But what that teaches them is that it's not worth putting in the effort. And so I think sometimes it's not inherent laziness, but it's particularly in industries that are very slow moving, there's not a motivation to put in the effort because we're taught that our effort doesn't matter in doing these things. And so overcoming that and helping the feedback problem is teaching really that growth mindset of, no, what you do does actually matter. And yes, this can take a while, but it's moving things in the right direction.
So what I'm hearing you say there is maybe laziness or these motivations, but in my mind, that all equated to there's an internal feedback problem. The efforts that are being put forth by frontline staff or whoever it may be internally aren't seeing that feedback loop closed in the appropriate way of seeing that the organization does something with the effort that you put in or the reward that you get out of it. The example, the direct one that we can easily vouch for is whether it's good data or bad data, meaning positive or negative reviews, we know that if you collect enough of that, especially on the negative side of where your organization is lacking, we day in and day out see organizations say, oh, this system has helped me show funders where we're lacking and with data show them that we could use the help. And it's in a lot of ways, it's short-sightedness, which is just a lack of feedback loop. They don't see the goal or they don't see the interconnectedness of those things.
I've never put that
Like
together.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
It's a crappy way to explain the feedback problem that it's a feedback problem.
Well, but truthfully, if you put yourself in the shoes of people doing this, we have feedback loops all over the place,
Yeah.
right? And what we're offering is a controlled feedback loop that you can actually see the end results of. The problem is when you're working in social services or in human services, the feedback loops that you have that are outside of your control are so elongated and so hard to actually see the end results of that it's no wonder that motivation equation falls apart. Because no matter how much you push or what levers you push, you may start to feel like, well, it doesn't matter. The organization doesn't care. And it may not be that the organization doesn't actually care. In fact, I think almost universally, the organizations care immensely. It's that they're just part of this really long process where it takes a long time to see a feedback loop close. And so inviting people to tackle the feedback problem is saying, hey, how can we make micro feedback loops that are a lot smaller, that can help people see and respond in a more timely manner than you're used to. So it's not, hey, 18 months down the line, did I help somebody and do I see that? It's more of this week, did I see the things I do impact those scores, impact the things that we're working on?
Yeah, that kind of comes full circle back to that exercise analogy of like if you try to start out in a too complex, too hard of a method, your motivation to continue on is super limited. In a lot of ways, I wonder if this isn't a good way to wrap up is, or maybe a hint or a tip for organizations is trust the simple, those micro improvements. I think oftentimes as we're explaining this, I think organizations look at what we're suggesting and to implement, and they say, well, that's so simple. Will that really work? And I really think a big thing is a lack of trust in a simple process of repeating and gathering benchmark data on the quality of the services that you're giving. I think it's just hard for people to look at that and say, I think they look at it and say, that's too simple.
Yeah. Well, especially in a world of complexity, they're expecting a complex solution.
Mm-hmm.
How about a trust of that we can provide hopefully at this point, but a trust of like, hey, here's the beacon. As you're swimming through the fog, like there's the beacon, and trust the process. It's a cliche, but it's like it'll get there at some point. Give us some time and trust that.
What is his name? I have been trying to think of that the past 2 weeks.
Which one?
76ers.
Doc Rivers?
No, player.
Are you talking about player? Oh, Joel Embiid?
Embiid, yes. For 2 weeks, I wanted to connect the trust the process with Joel Embiid. I could not remember his name. It was driving me crazy.
It's Sam Hinkie, he was the general manager that was the trust the process guy.
Telling that to Embiid, right?
Yep,
Sorry.
and Embiid,
sports tangent.
Yep, and Embiid was all about it. But the interesting thing, and maybe that's another point, right? We talked about sustainability. We talked about the fear. We talked about pride. We talked about a bunch of things why people don't do feedback, and why it's a feedback problem, not a feedback solution. Which really, that's what it is. It's a solution that.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say feedback is a solution to all of the world's problems, but man, is it a good start. But when we talk about all of those, I think honestly, boredom is one of the things that we've found here is that it is really hard to consistently do small things every day.
Yeah.
And when you can master that in life, not let alone in the as an organization, you master that, and that makes a huge difference. I look at people that are achieving wildly, and it is rarely through giant bursts of energy or super complex solutions. It's often through just sustained same thing every day, day in, day out.
You might be able to remember the name of the company. You've said it a number of times. Is this company? It was one of the founders speaking. Says, yeah, that was a 15 or a 20-year overnight success.
Oh yeah,
because no one had ever heard about them really.
Yeah, the Pluralsight was at a conference for Pluralsight, and they, the CEO shared how it was a 15-year overnight success, right? And the fascinating thing is in my mind, Pluralsight had started 2 years before that.
Yeah.
Right. And they're massive and they're doing great. And
all of a sudden they had a big old new building.
Yep. And I was at and we'll talk about this in the book, but at the conference, and Ellen DeGeneres is there and speaking, and and Alex Honnold and a bunch of other people. Speaking of somebody that does the same thing every day, like that's boring, like Alex Honnold's climbs,
Oh yeah.
like he does stuff that is maddeningly boring to people, but it allows him to do incredible things when that's called upon. And really, I think if we can overcome that pride, that fear, that boredom, you make rapid improvements.
Absolutely.
Cool.
I think that's probably
I guess any other reasons you think organizations don't gather feedback? Why they're
I think that boredom one is a huge boredom and
Yeah. What if it's just that they don't see the benefits of it? Like,
I see that.
Like, yeah, maybe they're just not, that growth mindset is what they don't have because maybe they've never seen it. They've only had negative responses every time they've tried to do it.
yeah,
They've
I
given
think
up on
about
it.
the implementation of systems, right? Like we've hear that. I hear that a lot on with what I do at Pulse, just talking to so many organizations. It's like, we love this idea. We got to get through these other 3 things. And I hear all the time, my team will kill me if I try to implement one more thing right now.
Yeah.
And who knows of those things that they're implementing. If they're implementing 3 things, it'd be interesting to hear from those orgs, like, okay, of those 3, how many stuck?
Do you think that's just a sustainability problem again, right? Because I was thinking back to exercise, and I don't mean to keep coming back to it, but I think it's just such an apt analogy to gathering feedback. But I think about people that I talk to that are like, oh, I hate exercising. And a lot of times when you talk to them, it's like, well, yeah, I did this and I hurt for weeks and I couldn't move and I couldn't do whatever. And so I did it for, 3 days and then I stopped. And it's like, oh man, you probably overworked at the beginning, but then also you stopped going. Like you experienced all of the pain without any of the benefits of it. And I wonder how much of sometimes that's what's happening in these organizations is they've tried to implement feedback processes, but done it in such a way where they feel all of the pain and none of the benefit, probably because, the traditional feedback process tends to be, hey, let's do giant surveys once a year that are super complex and heavy and hard. And instead of doing small bite-sized pieces, which means when they get the responses back, they're like, that was a pain in the butt. Let's never do that again. In the same way that I totally remember being in college and having a friend that wanted to do P90X, and we did P90X the first day.
That's horrible, by the way.
Yeah, it was rough. And I remember the second day just not being able to walk, just couldn't move, right? And the friend I was doing it with just quit, was like, now I'm done, not doing it anymore. And then I remember doing it. The first week was rough, got into it and enjoyed it, right? And so I wonder how many people are just in that phase where it just hurt so bad that now they say, no, I don't ever want to do it. And now looking back at it, I think if I were to go back to that friend, I'd say, okay, let's not start with P90X. Let's start with this other thing where, you're going to be sore. Pain comes with growth, but it's not going to be so sore you can't keep moving forward.
Yeah. One thing that came to my mind as you're going through all that is like, why aren't people getting feedback or putting this in as a high priority practice? The other thing we might want to ask is, why do people part of the reason why they're doing feedback is maybe in their mind enough. And so in my mind, the couple reasons that come to mind quickly of, okay, well, why are you doing and what are you doing and why are you doing it? Almost always orgs that are already doing it in their mind is compliance based is the biggest one that I see. They're checking a box. Back to, you had mentioned that those 2 big surveys a year that just sap up a ton of energy. It's like, no, we are doing enough. That was hard.
Yep.
And so they're checking that box of, and that's up to them to decide. Is that good enough for the organization? Totally up to them to decide.
And I'm sure there's a bit of selection bias going on here because most of the time we talk to organizations that are struggling with this and know it's a problem, and so we help them. I'm sure there's organizations out there that don't seek us out because they're awesome at it, right? And they're doing well. But yeah, I do think there's plenty that are doing just enough. I apologize again for going back to exercise, but I think we've all seen those people that are exercising that don't seem to be getting the benefits of it. Mm-hmm. And then you see what they're doing for exercise and you realize like that's that doesn't work.
Inefficient.
Like lifting the same 5-pound weight every day your whole life isn't going to actually grow muscles. It may maintain, but you need to increase and get better at what you're doing and have that progressive overload. You need that in the same way with feedback. You need to continually be improving and getting better, not just say, hey, no, this is good enough and we're good.
And that analogy changes a little bit for those organizations that aren't contacting us. And again, I don't want to make it sound like we're the only solution but we have been doing it long enough. But from a business perspective, we almost want to flip that workout analogy because you need to be more efficient. You need to be doing it the most efficient way. Or I guess keep on that same workout analogy of if you can go in and get the same work done in a 15-minute workout that you could in an hour, 2-hour workout, which one is better for your personal life, right?
Yep.
And so I think there are plenty of organizations that are doing a very good job, and they don't want to relook at how they're doing things because they already put so much time, energy, and effort. And they are trusting a process. They have their process and they trust it, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think Candid is written for those groups, right?
Yeah.
Maybe to help them realize there may be groups that they're accidentally isolating and not including their feedback process by doing it. But it brings me all the way back around, and maybe to wrap up here, I'm curious for both of you, what advice would you give an organization that maybe doesn't have a feedback process in place? Where would you have them start? And maybe look at a group that also doesn't have much money to try and buy one of the more expensive solutions. So if you're really going just very baseline, how would you have them start gathering feedback?
It seems like that's more of a fundamental question that they should ask themselves internally, like why are we actually doing what we're doing? Because I think most of them in this space are gonna say, hey, I want to make a difference. I want to help this person out. I want to get this person to recover from such and such. Well, why would they want to do that? And how are you going to best do that? Well, there has to be this line of communication in order to do that. So anyway, I think just that baseline of why that growth mindset. Let's establish that growth mindset that you have, or let's build a growth mindset. But let's ask ourselves, hey, why are we doing this?
Yeah,
Love it.
I like that. I'd come back to the workout analogy, if you will, but the morning routine. Start small and iterate where needed, but pick 3 things that, from a feedback process standpoint, if your morning routine is start the day with gratitude, journaling, and drinking water, what are those 3 things in your organization from a feedback perspective that are non-negotiables that I can start with? I know it's not a huge lift, and then see what you get out of that for a week and then for a month, and then decide, that's where the iteration comes in. Do I want to bump that morning routine or that feedback routine up to 5 things? So create a process is my advice.
Yeah, great advice. And I think mine would just be start somewhere, right?
Yeah, start.
And to beat the exercise horse again, that has clearly died here. I think when we talk about, I had back surgery months ago, right? And one of the most interesting things was realizing that the exercise that I wanted to do, my brain thought about exercise, was very different than the exercise my body could do. But the exercise my body could do, which was just walking, literally in circles around my house, benefited my body greatly. I think similarly with organizations, the feedback program you may want, and hopefully you get there. That's great. You can get there, but your organization may not be ready for that, and may be more ready for those baby steps of walking around the house, of trying to find whatever the simplest thing is to be able to get feedback. And I think the important thing is starting, because you can't get to the big thing until you do those baby steps to begin.
Yeah, I like it. Start.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Candid Conversations. We'll have more of these where we discuss the book Candid and how to get psychologically safe feedback from the individuals you serve. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. Visit our website at pulseforgood.com.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice.